अवतार मेहर बाबा की जय. Daily reading of Lord Meher, the biography of the Avatar of the Age Meher Baba, Volume 1 by Bahu Kalchuri. Page number 85. The chapter is on Shariar, the Dervish from Iran. On this page we see Meher Baba's father, Shariar Mondgir Irani, and the picture was taken in 1890s. One night in 1860s, Age's roving sight was riveted on a marvelous scene in the tiny village of Khormasshar, Persia. The night was dark. In a lonely, desolate area outside of town, a child of 7 is lying on the floor of the Tower of Silence, a dead body tied to his feet. Grasping as this bizarre scene, Age pondered. If a vulture swoops to devour the corpse, what will happen to the child? It too will perish. How brave this little boy is. Even 5 or 6 adults huddled together could not dare to stay in such a place. On page number 85 is a picture of Meher Baba's father wearing a little cap, black color cap. Page 87. Age's eyes remained glued to the child, and when dawn arrived, the child was still safe. Age was then convinced that God was watching over this boy and his future was assured. Who was the child? He was the same one who was to become a dervish, whom the divine voice had spoken of. O Age, the world is eager to hear this story. In Persia, during the 19th century, the plight of Zoroastrians was terrible. The atmosphere of the holy land of Maji had changed drastically since the prophet Zoroaster had sanctified Persia 7,000 years ago. The followers of Zoroaster were considered kafirs, unbelievers by the Muslims, and were systematically mistreated and oppressed. The star of Islam was held high, and those who did not embrace the Mohammedan religion were mercilessly persecuted. Their lives were in constant danger, and except for Ahur Mazda, their god, no one else was the Zoroastrians' protector. Over the centuries, the majority of Zoroastrians had converted to Islam, and most of those who refused had fled to India. Those who did not migrate from Persia had to bow before the Muslims and their laws, tolerating their cruelty and harassment. There was no one to blame for this situation. The wheel of time spins circumstances according to divine law. From the humanistic point of view, such a condition could well be viewed as unnatural. Man persecuting man in the name of religion. But without God's will, nothing happens. So the spread of Islam and the Muslims' outrages openly perpetrated against the Zoroastrian community in Persia in the 1800s brought this natural state of unnaturalness. In those days, the eldest of the party of Zoroastrians had to dismount from his horse to signify homage to Islam. If he passed before even a Muslim child, the torture and kidnapping of Zoroastrian children was also not infrequent. It is said that Muslims would trick a Zoroastrian boy to enter their house. Behind locked doors and shaded windows, they would force the boy to stand in a circle. Every Muslim present had a needle concealed behind his back, and one by one they would viciously stick the needle into him. The boy would eventually collapse and die. The body would then be flung into the streets of Zoroastrian community. On In those days, the eldest of the party of Zoroastrians had to dismount from his horse to signify homage to Islam. If he passed from even a Muslim child, torture and kidnapping of the Zoroastrian children was also not infrequent. It is said that Muslims would trick a Zoroastrian boy to enter their house. Behind locked doors and shaded windows, they'd force the boy to stand in a circle. Every Muslim present had a needle concealed behind his back, and one by one they would viciously stick the needle into him. The boy would eventually collapse and die. The body would then be flung into the streets of Zoroastrian community. Zoroastrian women also faced every type of assault and humiliation, and there were reports of rape and murder. The lives of all Zoroastrians were in constant peril in Persia. However much abused or vilified, they had to bear it or face certain death. The Muslims violently restrained the Zoroastrians from practicing their religion. The worship of fire is symbolic of the universal struggle between the forces of light and the darkness, frantically believing that it was the duty of Islam to curtail the spread of this blasphemous faith. However abused they were, the Zoroastrians did not dare utter a word in retort to the Muslims, and they would not defend or justify themselves before their prosecutors. But they were as human as their enemies and had a deep sense of right and wrong. Although they would often become angry, they would not express it to the Muslims. So, in order to vent their anger, they resorted to a clever outlet. Opposite their houses, all Zoroastrians had a pillar sunk into the ground, and they would pretend that the posts were their enemies, kicking or hitting it, then spitting it on it. Their daily outbursts would relieve their frustration, and they were then better able to tolerate the persecution they constantly faced. In such troubled times, Sharia Mongair Irani was born in the town of Khurmashar in the Zoroastrian community on March 21st, 1853. Sharia's father, Mongir, was a poor man like most Zoroastrians. For how could the Zoroastrians, who were considered kafirs, prosper in this land of religious strife? Besides farming and gardening, in which all participated, Mongir's job was that of a caretaker of a local Tower of Silence, the place where Zoroastrians brought their dead to be devoured by vultures. It was not a well-paying vocation, but he managed to support his family of 2 sons and 1 daughter. Sharia's mother had died when he was only 5 years old, and Mongir was profoundly grieving by her passing. Mongir was not an orthodox Zoroastrian, nor was he a zealot. He had his own religious feelings and would participate in both Mohammedan and Zoroastrian festivals. It is said that he saw divinity in everyone, the soul in every man. Mongir was an enigma to his Muslim neighbors because he was a devout follower of Mohammedan saint Wali Allah in Komrashar and was often seen going to this saint. Because of his devotion to this Mohammedan saint, Mongir and his children were spared the most cruel blows of persecution that faced most of the Zoroastrian community. Mongir also practiced the tenets of the ancient faith and was an exceptionally good man who never neglected his parental duty towards his children. It is said he considered the persecution at the hands of the Muslims as a means of spiritual self-effacement. Although poor, he constantly remembered God, and because of this, he thought himself more fortunate than any wealthy person. After his mother's death, Shahryar was well cared for by his older daughter, Piroja. Shahryar did not go to school, but would accompany his father to the Tower of Silence each day, where he would play alone or muse with the spirits that hovered there. The young boy had a contemplative nature, and this was where he would pray and meditate. In Persia, at this time, only the children of rich would obtain a formal education. There is no chance of admission in school to a poor Zoroastrian. Often at night, during his lonely vigils over the death, Mongir would grieve for his departed wife, but this little son's championship would comfort him. Sharia's innocent prattle would amuse his bereaved father, and occasionally he would be awestruck by how innately wise his son was. During the years at the Tower of Silence, an intense interest in things spiritual was awakened in Sherian, and he thought deeply about finding God. He was an intelligent, adventurous boy, not afraid of anything. That characteristic remained throughout his life. He never felt new fear. One day, when Sharia was 7 years old, his father left to do some work in the town, leaving him alone at the Tower of Silence. Montgier was delayed in returning, and during the evening the corpse of the child was brought. But since it was after sunset, the last rites could not be performed until daylight. Thus the funeral party left the corpse outside the wall of the tower. In that lonely, desolate area, hungry vultures hovered over the corpse, but little Sharia threw rocks to keep them away. Sharia, determined to protect the child's body, tied the legs of the child to his own feet and lay down next to the corpse. The vultures screeched, became more furious, but no one swept down upon the boy. When Montgier returned, he found Sharia sleeping next to the corpse of the child and their legs tied together, and he was amazed at the bravery of his small son. Every day, in peaceful contemplation, Sharia would sit alone in the compound of funeral grounds, immersed in the remembrance of God. The boy's heart that had awakened, and he began to long for the seeing of God. One day, when he was absorbed in concentration, all of a sudden he was startled to see a young woman running towards him. When the woman, a Zoroastrian, reached him, she fearfully told Sharia that Muslims were chasing her and asked him to help save her from their captures. Nearby was a little bakery where unleavened bread was prepared and distributed to the poor by the relatives of deceased in their memory. That day no one had died, and so the large oven was not lit. Sharia guided the girl to it, helped her climb inside, and they returned to his place of meditation. Shortly after, several Muslim horsemen came galloping up to the tower and demanded, "Boy, did you see a girl run past this way a few minutes ago?" Sharia replied, "I have been here for almost an hour, but I haven't seen a dog pass by. No girl has run from here." Believing him, the Muslims rode off, and Sharia was happy he had not lied. It was a fact that no dog had wandered past that day, and the girl had not run from there. Sharia went back to the bakery and safely escorted the young woman to her home, to be received with great gratitude of the family. Sharia's spiritual inclination flourished early, and he must have met the Mohammedan Wali with him. From childhood, he had a detached outlook on life and was devoid of any material ambition. He did not think of himself as prospering in this world. When a human corpse would arrive at the Tower of Silence, he would think, "Death is inevitable. The happy as well as the miserable die. What is the meaning of life? What is its goal? Everyone departs from this world, leaving his or her joys and sorrows behind. So why not give them up while alive? But how?" Shariar's heart was restless to find answers that would satisfy him. Only God had the ultimate answers. So he decided to go in search of him. One day in 1865, Shariar told his father of his longing, but bid farewell to his family and left home. At that time, he was only 12 years old. The boy had never once stepped out of the hometown of Khurramshahr and did not know where to go. When he began wandering around Iran, he walked with just a few items of clothing and would rest anywhere at night, sustaining himself on begged food. This young dervish had no support except from God. He relied solely on God. What other help did he need? He had dedicated himself to finding God, and with the repetition of beloved's name, Yazdan, 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 at every step he searched for him. Shariar was destined to undergo severe hardships during his wanderings, but the young dervish ascetic did not lose courage. On the contrary, he gained inner strength through his suffering, since he was coming nearer to God. The wishes were not always well received in Iran. At times, the boys received insults instead of food. At times, he was beaten instead of giving shelter. But he didn't. He was but he who discards the world becomes God's, and this was Shirya's destiny. One day the boy's roaming brought him to the town of Bafet Badnian. Exhausted and hungry, Shahryar approached a bakery, begging a loaf of bread for his evening meal. The baker was about to give him the bread when an older Muslim ascetic arrived who would daily receive a loaf from the shop. The baker looked at the emaciated boy with pity and then told the Muslim ascetic, "Today you will not get bread because I am giving your portion to your little brother." The old ascetic became incensed at being denied his alms and began quarreling with the shopkeeper. "I am a true fakir," he shouted. "This boy is false. Are you really going to feed the rascal instead of me?" "You get bread every day," argued the baker. "Why are you grumbling? If I give it once to a chance wanderer, he is such a young dervish." The old fakir gave Shahryar a contemptuous glance and then resorted, "You call this brat a dervish, you fool? I am a true fakir. This boy is nothing but a beggar." The heated quarrel went on while a crowd began to gather. At last the Muslim said, "If the boy is a real dervish who loves God and is not hypocrite, I challenge him to answer my questions." Shahryar wanted to avoid a debate and was ashamed of the fakir's rude behavior, but the shopkeeper and others in the crowd urged him to accept the challenge. So a vigorous debate about God ensued. With sharp wit and keen intelligence, the boy replied to every question the fakir would pose, while the crowd cheered him on. The fakir, who had gotten the worst of it, was thoroughly embarrassed and finally retreated under a barrage of abuse from the crowd. While Shahryar was rewarded with a delicious supper, the boy had now become recognized as a Sufi dervish. There were times when Shahryar would travel with other renunciates. Once, while walking along the three older dervishes, they took refuge in a dense forest, and sitting around the campfire, the three elders boasted of their travels, courage, and wisdom. In their eyes, their little brother was a mere initiate on the spiritual path. When their pride got the better of them, one said, "Were a tiger to appear before me, I have the strength to kill it with my bare hands." The second responded, "I could reduce the beast to ashes with my sight alone." The last bragged, "I would tame it and ride on its back and journey from place to place." The boy kept quiet, knowing he possessed no such powers. The next day, as they were wandering through the forest, they spotted a python, and the three who had been boasting of their bravery the night before ran away in fright. Shahryar found a rock and fearlessly crushed the head of the last snake. Even when the head of the snake is crushed, its body continues to coil. Likewise, when the boy approached the three men, their pride had not subdued, and they said, "Don't think we were afraid of the python. To kill it was so insignificant. We left it to you, since you are the youngest." The boy did not rebuke them. Besides wandering through such wilderness, while always searching for the truth of God, Shahryar visited many shrines, including the tombs of Sufi poets Hafiz and Sanai in Shiraz, and contacted many advanced pilgrims and wandering dervishes in Iran. However, the young man was as dissatisfied and discontented as when he had left home. 8 years of hardest types of austerities and penance type of asceticism had not fulfilled his aim to gain one ray of the face of sun, Yazdan. Frustrated and disappointed in Iran, the young man of 20 still had sight of attaining his goal. Instead of despairing and abandoning his search for God, he resolved to leave for India to carry on the search. In 1873 and 1874, with his elder brother Khudadad, Shahryar boarded a steamer headed for the port of Bombay. In India, Khudadad found employment in a shop and prevailed upon Shahryar to do the same. Shahryar agreed and his brother arranged a position for him in the same shop. But in spite of accepting a job for the first time in his life, Shahryar did not change his ascetic ways. He strictly maintained his vegetarian diet as well as denying himself alcohol and tobacco. He was virtuous and endowed with a natural goodness. When off work, he spent most of his time meditating or reciting the name of God. Yazdan, Yazdan, Yazdan. His concentration was only on beloved God. His heart longed for the ray of light. Even while doing his job, Sharia's whole inner attention was directed towards remembering God. He made no show, but he did also made no secret of his devout nature. His hair was long and he always wore a long white robe, looking very inch, a typical Persian dervish. Obviously, he was not a typical employee in a public shop. The shopkeeper was very much the opposite, a materialistic who despised Sharia's piety and would scold him on the slightest pretext. Although Shariah had come to India seeking light, in that shop he found only darkness. When the owner finally accused him of dishonesty, he quit rather than be the target of such unjust accusations. Thus, after months, Shahryar was free once again. He took his wages but kept only 2 rupees, the rest he gave away. It seems as if this employment which had been thrust upon him was destiny's brief respite for Shahryar. Although the job had not been easy, as his destiny unfolded, Shahryar was to wander for 10 more years throughout India under circumstances much more trying than those he had already undergone in Iran. With the 2 rupees he had kept, Shahryar purchased a wooden bowl and a staff, and no further money. He decided to walk to Karachi, over 1,000 miles north. He wandered through Gujarat, Kutch, begging his way through Surat, Vadhwa, and Mandavi. The long days of walking severely blistered his feet, yet he did not stop. He would find shelter under a tree at night, and during the day continued walking on and on, repeating the name of God, Yazdan, Yazdan, Yazdan. If he happened to be given food when he begged, he would eat, otherwise, he would consider it God's wish that he fast. Sharyar's path crossed that of many sadhus, yogis, penitent ascetics, and he took refuge at places of pilgrimage. After a rigorous walking journey of 4 months, at last he reached Karachi. Why he journeyed to that city is not known, but after staying a month there, he resumed his journey, this time without a fixed destination. What a fate! Shahryar began, wandering aimlessly in the scorching desert. The hot sand began blistering his feet. His tongue swelled from thirst. Resting on the burning sands offered no relief from the blazing sun. He tried desperately to plod forward, but he was so weak he could not move one step further, and after crying out, Yazdan, he fainted. There was neither water nor shelter in this part of the desert. Sharyar's death seemed certain. Was this the end of the spiritual search? Would the ascetic die of thirst in this seemingly God-forsaken place? Had he been wandering all these years in search of God, only to die in this cruel way? He would not die yet. Slowly he opened his eyes. Standing before him were 2 figures, staring at him, an old bearded man and a boy. Each were holding leather bags filled with life-giving water. Shahryar struggled to his knees and stretched out his hands for water. The boy poured a little into his palm, but Sharyar's thirst was not quenched. Extended his hands towards the figure, he silently prayed for more, but no more was given. Both figures turned and walked away. Sharyar stared at them until they disappeared, and then with all his strength stood up, realizing if he stayed where he was, he would die. He took God's name, Yazdan, and stumbled onwards. But after going a short distance, he again fainted. He would, how could he cross the desert? He had neither water nor food, and he was alone in the remote, barren region. Who could help him? Had he hallucinated sipping the water? Then, startled from unconsciousness, he saw the old man and boy again standing before him, ready to help. This time they allowed Sharia to drink fully the cold water. His eyes conveyed his gratitude, yet the old man sternly said, "Why have you come here? Why did you distress the Almighty with your foolish behavior?" Shahryar could not answer. Pointing, the old man instructed, "Take this path. You will come across the hut of a hermit, and he'll feed you. After you have eaten, if you walk on the opposite direction, you will find a town." Shahryar listened to the advice with a headed bowed and with head bowed. He felt relieved after drinking the cool water. When he raised his head to thank the old man and boy, there was no one there. He was awestruck and humble, and his trust in God's protection was strengthened. Full of love and gratitude, he prostrated himself on the sand and prayed with all his heart. But who were the old man and a boy? They were divine messengers. They were Abdul's spiritual agents of perfect masters. Such Abdul's rescue endangered persons as they traversed their spiritual path. Taking the path shown through the sands, Shahryar walked to the hut where an old hermit gave him bread that was offered without his asking. Shahryar ate half at the hut and took the other half with him as he walked in silence towards the town. After walking several miles, Shahryar came to the bank of a broad, swift river which he could not cross since he did not know how to swim. Although he wondered if he had followed the directions properly, he was not alarmed, fully believing that God would send someone to help him across. Shahryar decided to lie down near the banks to wait. He fell asleep, but after a short nap, he was awakened by the sound of tinkling bells. A caravan had arrived, and Shahryar asked its leader how he intended to cross the river. The man replied the river had become shallow enough to allow the camels to cross, and that the men could ride on them. When Shahryar implored the man to take him across the river, he demanded 2 rupees. Shahryar explained that he was a renaissance, a dervish, and had no money, not even a paisa, a penny. But the greed-ridden man did not believe him and proceeded to take his caravan across the river, gradually disappearing. Although no one else arrived, Shahryar was not worried. Trusting in God, he was convinced that his mercy would find a way to get him across the river. At night, as night fell, an inner peace came over him. The moon shone brightly, and Shahryar's tranquility merged with a silvery reflection in the ripples of rippling water. Awestruck by the splendor of nature's beauty, so near to the desolation of the desert, his heart longed more than ever for the sight of God. He had searched for so long. He wept out of longing and joy. Seated on the bank of a river, feeling hungry, or took out the remaining loaf of bread, schools of fish swarmed became him, and seeing them, Shahryar broke the bread into pieces, tossing them to the fish. His appetite left him in the enjoyment of watching the fish leapt out of the water for the crumbs. Suddenly he heard a harsh voice demanding, "What are you doing here?" Turning around, he faced a tall, burly man who towered over him. "I'm waiting to be taken across the river. I cannot swim," he answered. Hearing his reply, the stranger laughed and said, "How did you expect to cross it by sitting here? You don't have to swim. Come with me, and I will show you a way." Shahryar followed the man to a mud embankment that stretched all over the way across the river. He was perplexed to see this natural bridge, which he was certain he would not have noticed earlier, and inwardly he began to praise God for his mercy. Reaching the other side, Sharia was about to think of mysterious guide when the man took his hand in his and said, "There is no need to thank me. Now hold on to my hand. I will take you through a shortcut to the town." The guide swiftly zigzagged through the darkness, taking cheerfully, talking cheerfully along the way. Shahryar felt a strange sensation as he held on, listening to the man's conversation. He felt as if earth was slipping away beneath his feet. After a short time, the light of a town were visible, and before he knew it, he was walking in a bustling street. A guide took him to a pawn and tobacco shop and said, "Wait for me here until 11 o'clock." Then he walked away. When it was nearly midnight, there was still no sight of the unknown friend. The shopkeeper was starting to close up for night, and Shahryar asked him, "How far is it from this town to the river?" "60 miles," replied the shopkeeper casually. Shahryar could not believe it. He had covered 60 miles in about half an hour. He then knew that God had sent an angel to help him, and his heart cried out, "O Yazdan, O beloved God, you are infinitely loving, you are infinitely merciful, but why don't you allow me to have sight of you? My life is only for you. I love you alone." Intense longing for God realization overcame Sharia. From the divine help he had experienced, his heart longed to see God, and his search for him became even more intense. He resolved within himself to sacrifice his very life in pursuit of God, and he vowed not to give up this pursuit under any circumstance. Saved from death of God's direct intervention, Sharia roamed only more throughout India under clouds of austerity and deprivation. Barefooted, bearded, in a dervish robe, he walked through streets, down lanes, and alleys to contact saints and advance pilgrims for help to his search. He denied himself food or comfort for that contact. At night, he would rest wherever he could, along a sidewalk of a street, or under the tree of wilderness, or in a cave. He begged for whatever food he received, and as always accepted it as God's mercy. He walked and walked mile after mile, year after year. His feet became raw, cut by rocks and stones, and thorns pierced his wounds. But the wounds on his feet were nothing compared to the wounds in his heart. A burning love urged him on, with the name of Yazdan, Yazdan, ever on his lips. His search to see God continued. When Sharia reached Gujarat, he saw a village some miles in a distance beyond a small river. In the middle of the river was an island thick with vegetation. The local people, however, were superstitious and warned him not to go there. "No one ventures across this river," they said, "because of the soft muddy bottoms, brambles all over the island, and a hideous ghost lives there. Take our advice, do not go to that island, but take the road to the town 5 miles ahead." But Sharia replied, "I am not afraid of ghosts. If there is a ghost on that island, I shall meet him." Irrespective of this counsel, he began to wade through the shallow waters. By the time he reached the island, it was dark, and instead of finding a ghost, he found himself ensnared in a dreadful jungle with overhanging vines which made his pathway cumbersome. Fumbling about and again wading across the river from which he thought was the other side of the island, he forged his way but found himself exactly where he had started. It was too late then to take the longer road, so he decided to try to wade across the river once again, but this time he wanted to avoid the island. He entered at another point, but when he reached midstream, he stepped into quicksand. His staff sank in the soft mud, and the more he struggled to get in, the more he sank. When sinking in the mud, he prayed, "O God, if it is your will that I should die in this way, I am ready. But before I die, allow me to have one glimpse of your effulgence. For years I have thirsted for your sight. I have not cared about my life. Give me a glimpse of your beauty before I die." Concentrating on repeating God's name, Sharia struggled, pulling himself out of the quagmire. When he reached the other side, he collapsed, thanking God for rescuing him. After a while, hearing some villagers, Sharia hailed them. "Show me the way to the town," he requested. Seeing this strange, ominous figure rising out of the shadows, covered with mud, the men ran away, shouting, the ghost of the island is after us." A few of the men cautiously approached him, holding lanterns and clubs in their hands, and they were assured that he was indeed only a stranger in need of guidance. They brought him to the village and attended to his needs. In the course of his travels throughout India, Sharia came across different types of yogis, ascetics, and uh, penitents. Once he encountered a man in Ratlam who had been sitting for years in one position, supported only by his thumb. But this form of asceticism was not for Sharia. His suffering was a thirst for the wine of love. Shortly thereafter, in the same district of Ratlam, he encountered an old woman seated near a lake on the outskirts of the town. She made signs for him to go to the village, which he did. Everything there was spotless clean, but not a single living person was around. Amazed, Shahryar instantly realized that the village was an apparition, an illusion to be taken as a metaphor. Through the house of the heart be pure, it takes, though the house of the heart be pure, it takes ages for God to enter. He understood that he had seen and returned to the old woman who gave him a loaf of bread as prasad. After eating, he left whatever, having exchanged a word with her. While journeying through the hills near Juara, Shahryar encountered an old man seated on a hill deeply immersed in meditation. After some time, the man opened his eyes and asked, "What do you want?" Shahryar replied, "I do not want anything." Hearing this, the old man was deeply pleased and said, "You are blessed." In the midst of the travels during the past 10 years, although Shahryar encountered many sadhus, yogis, ascetics, and saints in India, none of them could satisfy his inner quest nor quiet his restlessness. He was destined to find place in the different way. During 1884, at the age of 31, the ascetic Shahryar became increasingly despondent with his austere ways. Despair and desperation tore at his heart and mind. For the first time, he began to doubt if his aim would ever really be achieved. He felt hopeless as never before. He knew that with his formidable determination, he would venture anywhere, yet he could not accomplish what he wanted, to realize God. Mentally, he was breaking down. His perseverance was turning into bitter frustration. As a last resort, Shahryar wandered to an isolated forest in Gujarat, where he decided to perform what is known as Chilla Nashani, a severe spiritual penance. A circle is drawn on the ground by the penitent's own hand. For 40 days and nights he must not step out of the circle, foregoing food, water, and sleep. He must face whatever comes. Those who try it but do not succeed usually die or suffer madness. There appeared to be no other solutions or choices in Sharyar's mind. Although he had spent over 18 years wandering in search of truth, he had been chaste, he had lived on alms, he had always been honest, and he had been brave. But everything he had done seemed in vain, for he had not found union with God. To return to the world and live in the conformity with society was abhorrent to him. He had reached the point where it had to be either realization of God or death. Sure of his decision, he drew the circle around him on the ground, his heart imploring God to be united with him. Slowly time passed. He would not differentiate what did it was. Horrible screams were heard, then terrible noises roared louder and louder. Suddenly, in front of him, a lion roared, ready to devour him. He did not move. The lion disappeared. Later, a ferocious tiger appeared with stalk around the circle for hours. He did not move. The tiger disappeared. Suddenly, flames around rose out of the ground on all sides of the circles. The flames moved closer to him. He was convinced that he would be burned alive. Still, he did not move. The flames died. While screaming, giants appeared. They had painted faces like masks of death and blood in their eyes and spent spears held menacingly. He did not move. They too eventually disappeared. Many other dreadful visions came and vanished. All possessed the faces of horror, and they all came to torture him. The visions became continual. His mind suffered much. Courageously, Sharia held on and did not move from inside the circle for 30 days. Although only 10 more days were left for the completion of the chilla, it became too different for him to continue. A moment longer in the circle was more torture than he would endure. It was not possible for him to continue. He stepped out. All his years of penance and austerities had resulted in apparent defeat. Disheartened and half dead, Sharia dragged himself into a river and collapsed weeping. He fell unconscious into a deep slumber. Age too was weeping. How pitiful! 18 years of unimaginable asceticism and ended in bitter disappointment. Could not God have mercy on this pilgrim? Was this man to meet with such disappointment the rest of his life? What was to become of him? He wanted to die, but when even his God denied him, was there anything in his destiny besides his unfulfilled ideas? Yet assuredly there was. The divine voice spoke, and Shahryar listened. "O Shahryar, he whom you see, he whom you wish to see, his attainment is not destined for you. Your son, it is your son who will attain it, and through your son, you." Shahryar awakened with the words echoing, "Your son, through your son." He looked around, no one was there. Dazed, he heard his echo fading. Your son, through your son." He was puzzled and questioned, was this the voice of God? Was God commanding me? I have no son, no wife. How can I have a family? After a while, he thought, but what is wrong in living a family life if it is God's command? His command means everything, so there is no question of right or wrong. With these thoughts, Shahryar again fell asleep and slept soundly for 3 days. When he awakened, he remembered the words he had heard, and not knowing how to fulfill the divine injunction, began walking towards Pune. His face showed indifference. Some power was guiding him to follow his force. He walked more than 400 miles without feeling any pain. Led safely to the city of Pune, he found the house of his sister Piroja. As he entered the threshold of her home, he was so emaciated and tired, he sought only to raise the exhaustion of the many years of wandering. Tears of joy welled in Piroja's eyes as she opened the door and saw her brother. Both fell into each other's embrace, and with deep love and affection, she welcomed him into her house, where he stayed for some time. Shahryar's heart, however, was still crying out for something else. Austerities had not fulfilled his longing, yet he did not wish to give up the life of a dervish. How could he reveal this inner spiritual pain to his kind sister? End of chapter on page 96. The chapter was on Sharyar Tadarvesh from Iran, Meher Baba's father. The words that stayed with me from this is, if it is God's command, His command means everything. So there is no question of right or wrong. In His divine grace, and mercy, at Baba's divine feet, we bow down and thank Him for this beautiful experience of reading Meher Baba's journey on this earth. To be continued tomorrow with Baba's grace. अवतार मेहर बाबा की जय, अवतार मेहर बाबा की जय, अवतार मेहर बाबा की जय। बाबा मैं चरणन छोड़ न जाऊं, मेहर में चरणन छोड़ न जाऊं, जहाँ में तुमको सुख लागत है, जहाँ में तुमको सुख लागत है, वहाँ बिन कछु नहीं चाहूं, वहाँ बिन कछु नहीं चाहूं, बाबा मैं चरणन छोड़ न जाऊं, मेहर में चरणन छोड़ न जाऊं। तुम जैसे राखो वैसे रहूं मैं, तुम जैसे राखो वैसे रहूं मैं, तुम बिन और न चाहूं कछु मैं, बाबा बाबा रटो निरंतर, मेहर रटो निरंतर, तुम वारी वारी जाओ, बाबा मैं चरणन छोड़ न जाऊं, दाता मैं चरणन छोड़ न जाऊं, मेहर में चरणन छोड़ न जाऊं। अवतार मेहर बाबा की जय। Good night to dear Baba and good night to all Baba lovers.